Brought to you by the Astro Youth House chapter from STEM Arts Lab, Space on Earth is a student-led podcast that inspires listeners who are curious about space to explore the wonders of the universe through the voices of young thinkers, creators, and dreamers.
Each episode blends personal curiosity with scientific discovery, from the mysterious depths of black holes to the practical impacts of space on Earth, like GPS, climate science, and medicine.
Hosted by STEM Arts students from Taos, New Mexico, this podcast draws connections between space, art, and science, how these things all impact us here on Earth, and their meaning to humanity.
You'll hear raw, insightful conversations about topics like light pollution, the overview effect, lunar exploration, and the societal impact of the space race.
Whether you're into exoplanets, dark energy, or just stargazing from your backyard, Space on Earth makes space personal, accessible, and inspiring. We believe that space isn't just for astronauts and scientists, it's for everyone.
Join us on this adventure as we explore the cosmos from Earth, one story at a time.
Special thanks to the Lore Foundation for helping launch this podcast.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Space on Earth. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Wyatt.
And today we are here to talk to you guys about the Artemis II mission, which is really exciting. It'll be fun to talk about. So Wyatt, could you give us a little background of what that is and why it's important and relevant now?
Yeah, so Artemis II is very important. It's going to be the first time in 50 years humans have gone beyond low Earth orbit and around the moon. It is a demonstration mission for the Orion crew capsule to see if it can carry crew safely, and it will continue paving the path to get us actually back on to the moon.
So it sounds like the objective of this mission is to kind of like put some groundwork down and essentially to prep for landing and to test out the spacecraft. With Artemis, this is doing something a little different from past NASA missions, and this is launching on the Space Launch System. What exactly is that, and why did NASA choose that for this specific mission?
Well, that's a good question. SLS, or Space Launch System, basically reuses a lot of hardware from the Space Shuttle program, which saves NASA a lot of money. It uses 4 RS-25 engines from the Space Shuttle program, which would go on the back of the Space Shuttle. The first stage, or the liquid stage, is very similar to the external tank from the Space Shuttle era. And the 2 solid rocket boosters that are on SLS are just a little bit taller than the ones from the Space Shuttle era. So it's just, NASA chose it because it reuses a bunch of stuff that they had laying around or knew how to reproduce easily.
That's awesome. And it's really cool to see like how NASA and how we are using what we have, like the resources that we have, to be more sustainable. And we've talked about sustainability when it comes to space before. And so personally, I think it's really cool that we're able to reuse some stuff. So I can imagine like this is very different from like Saturn V with the Apollo program, and kind of what are those differences? How much more powerful is SLS? And what's some of the compare and contrast there? What differences are we seeing between those two strategies?
That's a really good question. Yeah, comparing SLS and Saturn V, let's start off by thrust. Saturn from the Apollo program back in the 1960s and 70s lifted off with around 7.6 million pounds of thrust with the 5 F1 engines, which were used on the first stage. But SLS, on the other hand, starts with 8.8 million pounds of force. But the takeaway here is that SLS produces more thrust at liftoff, but much of that comes from the SRBs, or solid rocket boosters, that burn out early. Saturn F1 engines provided sustained high thrust through the first stage, with superior overall performance. So after those SRBs would burn out on SLS, then it would just be the 4 RS-25 engines, which would be, I guess, a lower thrust to weight ratio after the SRBs burn out. Moving on to how much payload each rocket could carry to the moon, Saturn could carry 50 tons to the moon, which is the crew capsule and Apollo lunar lander needed to carry the crew to the moon, carried around a maximum of 50 tons to the moon. That's, of course, the payload, which is the crew, their crew capsule, and the lunar module. But SLS, it's not launching a lunar lander with Orion, which we'll talk about later. SLS, on the other hand, only carries around 27 tons to the moon, which is the crew capsule, Orion, which we'll talk about later, but no lunar lander. NASA contracted Blue Origin and SpaceX to make their own lunar landers to be used later in the Artemis program, hopefully on Artemis II. Moving on to mass and size, the Saturn V was 363 feet tall and weighed 6.2 million pounds, and SLS is 322 feet tall and 5.5 million pounds.
So it's totally cool to hear like all the differences between the two and how that problem solving is really like specifically fitted for each mission and what the purpose of that mission is, which is a really cool part about just engineering in general. And so you were talking about how it can lose some of that power after the first few stages. So what would be some of the risks that NASA's taking by using this instead of what they'd been doing in the past?
I mean, there's always going to be risk in spaceflight. In my personal opinion, SLS isn't more dangerous than any other rocket. Yes, it's reusing shuttle hardware, but with the two failures from the space shuttle program, one of which the Columbia incident, which was an anomaly during reentry, SLS can't even reproduce because SLS doesn't reenter. The only real risk, I guess, is in the SRBs, but I am fairly confident. I don't know. Spaceflight is overall dangerous. You're strapped to a bomb, basically, going into space. It's always going to be dangerous, but I don't think there's really anything to be really worried about.
That's exciting to hear also because, yeah, like you said, there's inherent risks with space travel. And with advancing technology, we find new ways to make that safer, more efficient, which is really interesting just to see the development of technology and engineering when it comes to space travel. You were talking about the spacecraft itself, and this is very different from what we were seeing with the Apollo missions, especially with the whole moon lander thing. So what kind of spacecraft is Orion? And like, what are some of the key differences from Apollo?
The differences from Orion and the Apollo crew capsule, for Apollo, it could only carry a crew of 3, but on Orion, there's an extra seat, so you can have a crew of up to 4. And after that, it's just more modern, I guess, or like safer. More like safer technology.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about, like just technology advancing so much, which is really exciting because it means that we get to learn even more and we get to have better information. We can get that information with less risk than what we've been doing in the past. And what's interesting about Orion is relying on a splashdown landing instead of landing on solid ground. Why exactly is that?
Good question. I mean, I guess NASA's doing that because that's how they've always done things with crewed missions. Mercury, the Mercury program, Gemini program, Apollo program. Those were all crewed programs, crewed missions that landed in the ocean. But the only real land landing or landing on solid ground that NASA did was with the space shuttle program with its like 135 missions. So, I mean, splashdown is easier. You really just need 3 large parachutes and a large boat to pick up the crew and capsule. It's just landing on land in a capsule. It makes it more complicated.
Yeah, totally. And so some like quick overview about the Artemis mission and about the projects that are going, like the project itself and the missions within it. So could you give us like a general idea of what is so exciting about the Artemis project? And it's fun because there's a little hint in the name. For any of you who don't know, the name Apollo comes from Greek mythology, and Artemis is Apollo's sister. So there's like a bit of a hint in the name there. But what exactly is so significant historically and culturally about the Artemis program?
We are going back to the moon to stay, not just camp. It'll be our gateway to the rest of the solar system, including Mars. The Artemis program in general is to have a permanent human presence on the moon, which gets me really hyped up. But Artemis II is the objective of just Artemis II. It's the inaugural crewed flight of Orion. This is the first time Orion and SLS is carrying crew, which is very good. You definitely want to have a test flight. It's a test flight, of course, in a way.
So it's both a test flight and a significant milestone, which is super cool. And that opens up a whole world of opportunity and of exploration that we've been wanting to do. And, it's kind of difficult to do stuff like always from Earth and have these missions, like especially to Mars and stuff, always from Earth. And so kind of having that gateway, like you said, it's just going to be really helpful in the future of space travel and space exploration. So talking about the Artemis program, this is a pretty significant program. So what would you say are some of the historical, like cultural significant pieces and milestones that have come from this program?
Well, Artemis II, it's going to be a crew of 4 that will be carrying the first woman, first African American, and first Canadian beyond low Earth orbit.
Which is super exciting because we talk about this, especially with the whole concept and kind of why we started space on Earth, is because space and astronomy and all of that, that's for everybody. And so it's really cool to see with missions and with programs like the Artemis program of how we're opening up that spectrum and that group of people that we're seeing. So talking about the crew, who specifically is flying on the Artemis II mission?
Very good question. First off, Reed Wiseman is the commander for Artemis II. He went to the International Space Station on Expedition 40 and 41, and he spent around 165 days in space. He served as NASA's chief astronaut before Artemis II, which is pretty cool. Moving on, we have Victor Glover, the pilot. He went to space twice on Expedition 64/65 and the SpaceX Dragon Crew 1 mission, both of those to the International Space Station. He spent around 168 days in space, and he was the first Black astronaut to live long duration aboard the ISS. Now moving on to our 2 mission specialists. Christina Koch was on Expedition 59, 60, and a part of 61. She spent 328 days in space and the longest single spaceflight by a woman, and she also participated in the first all-female spacewalk. And then finally, Jeremy Hansen, who is a part of the Canadian Space Agency. This Artemis II is actually going to be his first time in space. He was selected as a Canadian astronaut in 2009 with extensive training in robotics and mission operations.
Yeah, so it's super cool to hear about the crew and just all the incredible experienced people who are going to be a part of this project and coming from very different backgrounds. So you kind of mentioned some of the different roles. Could you explain a bit, what does it mean to be a commander or a pilot or a mission specialist? What are those people going to be doing? What do those roles look like?
That's actually a really good question. The role of the commander is the overall leader of the mission. Reed Wiseman is the commander, as I said earlier, is responsible for crew safety, decision-making, and execution of the flight plan. The pilot, Victor Glover, is essentially the co-commander and Orion's primary systems operator. And then both of our mission specialists, Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen, are responsible for mission-specific tasks science and system support. So both of them will manage experiments, demonstrations, and payload operations, and oversee communications, cameras, and data collection, and just assist with manual operations if needed.
Yeah, so super cool. And we kind of talked a bit about some of the significant milestones with this. And I also just think it's really cool that we have a mission going on like this. Personally, I think it would have been super exciting to be able to like witness the Apollo program in real time. And so it's kind of cool that the Artemis program is bringing that to our generation and into our time. So, kind of in your personal opinion, what do you think this program represents for people who didn't like grow up with the Apollo mission? And what do you think this mission will change about the perception of human spaceflight in general?
Well, on the perception, I hope a bunch of people who think that the moon landing was faked realize that they were incorrect. Because when we eventually land on the moon again on Artemis 3 and no earlier than 2028, I think just the biggest part is people are going to realize, like, wait, space exists. That's really cool. We're just on a rock. That's crazy. Let's go explore the planets, the stars. Let's go explore everything. I think that's what I'm hoping for.
I fully get what you mean. And I also think it's really exciting just because it's kind of like a reminder to how incredible outer space is and how incredible our technology is and what we're capable of doing. And so, like, that's exciting to me. I get excited about that. And I think that's just like a really cool concept. Kind of like you said, of people having this, like, whoa, this is real kind of moment that I can imagine was this experience when people saw the moon landing. And so it'll definitely be cool to kind of revisit that as like a new generation, as a society. And so, assuming that this mission is successful, hopefully it will be, what would be like the next step? What do we do after Artemis 2? And that isn't only about like what exactly is Artemis 3, but that's also about what kind of information would we be gathering from that. So what would be the effect that this mission would have in the future?
I guess the effect of Artemis 2 is, I mean, like I said earlier, it's a demonstration mission for the Orion crew captain. Never carried crew before. If everything goes right, which, I mean, there will be issues. I mean, it's a test mission. But if everything goes, as good as possible, then that means that we're going to land on the moon for the first time since 1972. The effect, right. I think the effect of Artemis 2, the main thing here about the Artemis 2 is demonstrating that Orion can carry crew around the moon and back to Earth safely, and also for SLS to launch that crew safely. But then after that, that means that we are just pressing down the gas pedal to actually land on the moon no earlier than 2028.
Which is just super cool to hear about. And like you said, it would be the first time landing on the moon after so long. And like, I get excited talking about this and hearing about this because, it's happened before, but especially for our generation and for those of you listening, a lot of us didn't get to experience the excitement of the moon landing. And so I just get super excited thinking about being able to have that happen again, and then to be able to kind of have this stepping stone and the starting point for reaching out into the solar system more and being able to explore other planets like Mars. It just really opens up a whole world of possibility and opportunity when it comes to space exploration. So I just think that the whole idea behind this program and about going back to the moon is just so exciting. So if the Artemis II mission proves humans can safely travel to and from the moon again, what should we be excited about for Artemis 3? Like obviously there's like the excitement of the moon landing. Is there anything else that we're missing there? Or do you think that the moon landing, like we've kind of covered it?
Well, yeah, the moon landing is the main part, but then that's the beginning of when we actually start to prepare to colonize the moon. And that means that eventually we are going to be a multi-planetary civilization, even though I guess, yeah, you can't really call the moon a planet. It's the Earth's moon. But still, it's two different celestial bodies, which will soon, hopefully, always have humans on them at all times. And then the moon is just the gateway, or I guess gas station to Mars. I mean, and also the moon has a lot of resources too. A lot of, I guess, ice, which we could turn into liquid hydrogen to launch into orbit around the moon, which then rockets coming from Earth could then refuel to go to Mars or just deeper into the solar system.
Yeah, and so that's really cool. And I like the analogy to a gas station, especially you're talking about converting some of those natural resources into liquid hydrogen that could be used for other programs and projects, which is really cool to hear about. And that also adds in, we were kind of talking about sustainability earlier and how do we make space travel more sustainable. The concept of being able to be like, okay, cool, we've made it to the moon. We have resources here that makes it so that we can get back to Earth safer or that we can go to other places safer. It's just really cool. That's really exciting to think about in how many possibilities and opportunities that opens up in general. And, so kind of to wrap up everything, definitely so much cool information about this program. It gets me super excited. I know I've said that already, but I'm just totally blown away by the capability that we have to learn more about what's around us. And I just think it's super cool. I think it's a really exciting mission, and we'll be able to see so much more from that point out. Wyatt, do you have anything else that you want to add in as we're closing up? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely do want to add one more thing. If you are watching this on the day of release, it's possible that Artemis II is actually launching today in a few hours, depending on when you're watching. But February 6th marks the first launch window for Artemis II, and we have only around 5 launch windows every month. So I think it's through the 6th to the 12th or something in February. And then there's a couple days in March, a couple days in April and May. But we're going back to the moon very soon. And I just cannot wait.
I know, super exciting and super cool. And hopefully for all of you guys who are listening right now, I hope that you guys are getting some of that excitement as well. And, of course, if you hear anything in this episode where you're like, oh my God, that's so interesting, I want to know more about that, or you just want to share your opinions and your excitement, feel free to reach out to us always. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any curiosities, we can definitely cover those in future episodes. And you can kind of become part of Space on Earth in that way, which would be really cool to interact with y'all a bit. So to close up, thank you all so much for listening. This is an exciting episode. This is kind of our first real episode where we're discussing topics of the year of 2026. So we're starting off on an exciting and optimistic start. Thank you guys again so much for listening. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Wyatt.
And we'll see you guys next time.